Hi, I'm Ann Cramer, A-N-N-C-R-A-M-E-R. Recently retired from the IBM Corporation after over 4 decades, retiring as the executive for IBM's corporate citizenship in the Americas, and currently having a ball as a senior consultant at Cox, Curry & Associates. I always love to start when you think about the who am I and the how we be or how we live as being first, it's the amazing blessing that I've always had a faith. I never had to question the who I am, what do I believe in, but it was always a part of who I am. And so consequently, one of the stories that I love to tell, even from the first grade or the second grade when I was elected in the first grade to be the student government representative, is that even from then there was a sensitivity of either I could say I feel so inadequate, therefore I had to get out of myself to be listening with and being with others. And even at 12 when we were going through confirmation, and I realized this was in the Episcopal Church where we were learning our catechism, and that the law was that we were asked to love others as we loved God and ourselves. And so consequently, and to think of a vision statement even then for me was that what I would walk towards or have as that North Star or vision or expectancy, that I wanted to be a part of a world in which every child could grow up to be an interdependent, contributing citizen. And those have lots of inferences, but that helped both how and where I walked, with whom I worked, family organizations that were all sort of creating to that woven tapestry of getting to that North Star. And even when we were going through our high school years and people were questioning their faith, I always think that I had the faith of a child, that I would just keep walking, keep listening, and it came out of, again, and it may have been who we were as women at the time, but that sense of, we could say inadequacy or never enough, but also the listening to, being involved with, having the ability to be the servant or the service person. I was always the chaplain or the service leader, the head cheerleader, often the president, because I could be organized. The math part of me gave me a sense of very practical problem-solving solutions. But the essence was that element of faith. And for many years, I still claim that I really understood what grace was by the family in which I had the privilege of being. That I could have a tantrum or tell mom or daddy that I hate you and go close the door, but that I knew I would still be loved in spite of the who I am or what I did, that I would still be loved, which was that grace statement of God would love me no matter where, and evidenced by mama and daddy. And also just having that gift of being having resources, but in fact, because Daddy was the head of the trust department at Florida Bank, we were always, you had to pay cash, you never spent more than you had, so therefore we were the last people on the block to get a TV. You know, so it's really fun. It's so that we weren't poor, but you would think you were always passing by because we were living so wonderfully frugally. But in that process, it gave us a sense of sort of the groundedness and staying in the same community forever and ever, going from first grade pre-K through to high school with the same group of friends. And so again, steadiness, consistency, continuity, grace, the underpinning of love. And even in high school, I was the one, just because I was the friendliest, the Miss Ideal, the cheerleader, I was smart, like I was the 5th person in a class of 600 in our rankings. And so but I was also the one who would speak to everyone in the hall and know everybody from the person that I didn't grow up to the newest person, to the oldest person, or the whole idea that everybody, I always loved this, everybody got dressed the same. It didn't matter who you were or what you did, what position you had, you were still a child of God. And so it's in that kind of understanding from the beginning, it was a from the beginning that became the undergirding of the who am I, how I serve, how I live. And even I can remember, this was so fascinating, when I went to IBM, 1966, we all went to classes, and I'm a math major, And it was fabulous. All the people who've influenced me, like the math teachers in high school, and head of the math department at Salem, which is where I went, Salem College, a college for women. And I mean, those were a whole lot of stories. The stories of, like, I was the freshman class president because I remembered everybody's name in my class. And it wasn't because I just cared. I wanted to know who you were and what your name was. And so I knew everybody's name. But the head of the math department at the time, you had 3 choices. You would be a teacher or a nurse or get married after you graduated. That was it. So I knew I didn't have the patience to be a teacher. I didn't have the patience or the nurturing, really, to be a nurse. And I didn't have a ring. So what was I going to do? And it was fabulous because the head of the math department, Mr. Curley, whom actually Jeff, my husband, went up and met at Salem one time when he was driving through Winston-Salem. But he said, well, you know, this company, IBM, which of course I didn't know how to spell IBM, is hiring. And in January of my senior year, I got an interview in Poughkeepsie. And here is this Southern girl, Jacksonville, Florida, going to Poughkeepsie in January, and they were way east on the time zone. So at 4 o'clock, it was pitch dark, freezing cold, bone cold. But I went to my little interview and got 3 job offers from IBM, one to be a software developer in Poughkeepsie. And at the time, they were growing the Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, or to be a software designer in Raleigh, or to be a systems engineer in Jacksonville, which is where I grew up. And I took the systems engineer because that was the technical arm to the sales team in the branch, in the field, which was perfect. And so I literally went to Jacksonville as a systems engineer. And then the first summer, in June of that year, we went to Newark, New Jersey in 1966 and then 67, the year of race riots and tensions. And here I am, my little white Anglo-Saxon Protestant self. Didn't know many Catholics, definitely didn't know many Jewish people, definitely didn't know many African Americans, other than those who were working within the context of our families. So I go this Newark. I was again, knowing that everybody is just a child of God. We had these most brilliant African American IBMers who were teaching our class. And every morning I would walk into Able Delicatessen because our hotel was on the downtown corridor of Newark, and then our office would just walk, and then we'd go into Abel's. And Mr. Able every morning said, "Hello, Florida sunshine." He'd have a glass of orange juice, and he said, "I think I'll start serving grits instead of hash browns." But literally, you think, Mr. Able, every day, "Hello, Florida sunshine." And one day, heat of the summer, very tense situation in Newark, I dropped my contact lens out while I was walking along the sidewalk in Newark, New Jersey, in front of the YMCA, which was between the IBM office and the hotel. So I'm on my little hands and knees. Out come moms and dads picking up their children at the end of the day from the Summer Y program, construction workers with their lunch pails, and anybody else. And they were on their hands and knees with me. I thought, this is so amazing. So I was meeting people who were so different. And that summer a friend of mine was at the beach at Bay Head, New Jersey. And I couldn't imagine you had to have a key to get on the beach. And here I'm coming from Florida. And I thought, and of course I had a key, but all of a sudden you realize about barriers and privilege and differences, but samenesses and similarities, and how we're all the same people. And so as my career with IBM was fabulous, I was immediately brought to Atlanta because they were building up what was then the support centers. And they needed a few women in the support centers, which I loved. And of course, everybody was moving to Atlanta at that time anyway. And so when I was here, I sort of had my 3 strands. I had my IBM professional strand. I had my junior league strand, which was the service part, but it also connected me to all of my friends with whom I had grown up with, and my faith community, because I had some friends at both Columbia and Candler Seminary who were working at the time with integration in Atlanta and working with the children at Bass High School specifically to meet the children who were the African American children who lived south of the railroad track, and the white children who were primarily rural children who had come to the city for new jobs that were living in what is Little Five Points in Inman Park. And so I had my little 3 strands of life, and it was cute. The guys at IBM would always know I was somewhere in the office. Maybe she's in the data center, because I put my jacket on the back of my coat, of my chair, and go down on the streets. That's where I would work with kids who were ODing or runaways in the strip, where on Peachtree at 14th Street, which was the strip where the hippies were, or the kids were, and then I'd come back and I would rush kids to Grady in my little car that Daddy had gotten me, my canary yellow Oldsmobile, which was adorable. But, you know, one day it got wrecked, and so I sold it for an old Chevrolet with no air conditioning, and the man felt so bad because he didn't want to have to deal with Daddy, because he was like, oh, Mr. Wilson will be very disappointed if I sell you this car. I said, oh, but that's all I want. He said, I'll put an air conditioner in it for free, just so I wouldn't not have a car. But anyway, so it's so cute, and you begin to strand together your life. And I think that was, again, back to my initial 12-year-old confirmation North Star of how do I integrate those pieces of our life, whether it's service through, and knowing I had access and influence and relationship with people who had resources through the Junior League, the intellectual and the amazing solutions part through IBM, and then the faith community of people who were really understanding on the ground what were the needs of people relative to both poverty and education. And it's been interesting to see, then Jeff, my husband, and I met through the work on the streets with the kids. He's a clinical psychologist by trade, but he came into Atlanta and visited some friends who were at Columbia Seminary, and so he started helping out with the youth work and the street work. So we were doing that together. We got married in January of 1972. Fun fact, we were living in the little cottage, which is now Paideia School. And we were there when Paideia was starting on Ponce de Leon. Other fun fact, 4 of us who were the girls who we were living lived at 1080 West Paces Ferry in that cottage, which is now Mr. Arthur Blank's home. Fun fact, 2 fabulous cottages. It's so fun. Oh, Lord. I mean, those are those little fun facts. Cottage 1080 West Paces, cottage 1487 Ponce de Leon. And then we said Paideia started taking over the cottage, and Jeff and I bought our house in Little Five Points, which we've been in since 1972. But our work together, where Jeff is so interesting, where our work together, Jeff continued to plow his ground more at the grassroots, where we always say we have the same base values, where our vision and our life values and beliefs are the same, but his skill set, where he then went into teaching. He actually worked in the juvenile justice, and he realized that he didn't want to see more children come into the JJ, the juvenile, that it would be much more wonderful for these kids if they had an education and more options in their lives. So he worked and started teaching physics, and because he was pre-med and clinical psych, and used that as his teaching. So he stayed on the teaching level in terms of providing the skill set for kids to move through their next contributing interdependent citizens, where I realized that my skills were more problem solving and to get to the systemic or policy changes, serving on boards, working on many governors' commissions, and trying to reach those kind of places of consensus that would create systemic change. So that when we were married, then after Megan was born, I theoretically retired from IBM in 1978 after Megan was born. Actually, it was 1979. And then started doing a lot of work with then Governor Busby with starting leadership programs like Leadership Atlanta, but starting all over the state, downtown development, community betterment programs, starting job training so that people would grow in community. I did that as a volunteer. It was when the governor's office of volunteer services. So I worked as a, quote, volunteer for 10 years. But again, the grace of having my IBM credentials, my volunteer leadership credentials through the Junior League, because I was president of the Junior League in 79 or 80. And therefore, I was on boards like the United Way as one of the only women and worked with visioning processes with the chamber, because I had the business credential in working with the business, the chamber using their visioning for what they wanted to be. So it was one of those extraordinary times where I had the time and availability to work on some major community initiatives in that 10 years. One of my favorite one was Governor Busby had to fill out all the professional registration boards like medical, legal, engineers. And because I had systems engineer in my title at one point, and he had to put a woman on those boards, so he put me on the board of registration for professional engineers, and it was so fun. I loved it. I was on the board for 11 years. Loved it, and chaired it for about 6 just because I knew how to run a meeting. We'd get it done. But over that time, it was amazing to watch the transition of women and minorities coming into the engineering rank. When we started in 79 and 80, very few women. It would be the very minimal minority. You know, you'd have 1 woman and 2 minorities, and then at the end, starting into 89 and 90, that we'd have many more coming through. So it was really fun, and I got to be a part of the campus of Georgia Tech a lot. Not that I graduated from there, but just because I would be a woman that would meet with women, the Society of Women Engineers, the SWEs. So that was fun, but all during those 10 years got a chance to really get involved as a volunteer. And then in 1989, just before the bid was determined for Atlanta to be the Olympic site, I was on the United Way board at the time, and Tom Smith, who was the head of IBM, said, "Would you ever come back?" I think, have to pray about it, talk to Jeff about it, think about it. Yes, because I came back into what was the external programs role and would be responsible for IBM's part with the Olympics in Atlanta. So again, I was, quote, out for 10 as a volunteer, came back in 89 in the role of external programs, and then stayed in that role till I retired in 2012. But again, it expanded from Atlanta to Georgia to Southeast to Mid-Atlantic Southeast to East to US to North America to the Americas as the company changed. So I never had to move. I only had 2 managers from 1989 till January 1, 2013. Amazing. It was amazing. I loved every minute of it. It was a part of that whole resurgence of companies as being good corporate citizens and revamping that whole understanding of what that meant across the full spectrum of the company. And it was very, very fabulous. But again, it was the weaving together, and because IBM cared about education, and Jeff and I were already ingrained in the educational systems and systemic changes in Georgia, then I had that platform to work across the country, if not the world, in enhancing the capacity of every person to be an interdependent contributing citizen, which meant they were adding value wherever they were. So it was really one of this fabulous kind of congruence. You can always tell I'm a math major: integration, alignment, congruence, strategic, and yet open and flexible and fluid, but still on the path. I always like the path, because you can think tributaries, you can go off the path, but then you can come right back on. You can stumble along the road and still get back up and keep on, keep on, keep on. Well, it was interesting because I started in 1966. It was very branch focused, and I mean, I loved it. I loved being in the branch and then at the district office and being a part of the CEL team. My favorite job when I was in the district office was being what we called executive education, teaching client executives terminology about data processing like bits and bytes and hexadecimal, and not being overwhelmed by those computer nerds that were trying to overwhelm them with how they can manage data processing. And so it was fun, though, when I came back. We had already transitioned into the first areas of PCs. And so getting more diffuse, and obviously with IBM, with Mr. Akers at the time, it was interesting because I was chair of the United Way of Atlanta board the year he was chair of the United Way of America board. Also the same time, he was in his own transition with the company. So you could watch that transition. I literally was up close and personal with that transition. And so it was so fun. And I think of myself often as I think of IBM, that over time the values and the basic beliefs never changed. The fluidity and flexibility was listening to the client and serving the client's needs, starting with meat scales and things that had to do with what the client needed 103 years ago. The computer and tabulating company, whatever you needed, the scales. And so in that period in the 89 and 90 is that the company just had to listen more acutely to the client, which is why it was a miracle that Mr. Gerstner came in and really forced everybody to refocus on what is the client, what do we offer that's of value, then how do we make it work. So you went from the manufacturing company that produced equipment and provided those equipment solutions to the client to creating new consultancies and being at the lead. Then the fun part, because IBM never disinvested in its research, so it could always stay innovative and being creative and innovative. And that's why I love the whole idea of innovation is that point of intersection between invention and insight. And gratefully, the company was able to twist around, get the boat righted up, and moving forward. So is it dramatically changed? Oh, yes. Is it dramatically different in terms of a global reach and having colleagues all over the world where we all worked on the same team, and you'd be up at 11 o'clock talking to your friends in Australia who are doing something similar to what we were doing, all on the same team. And also having everything being more corporate and centralized to effectively strand across, taking away the silos, which was both a cost saving but also an idea creating, enhancing towards more communication. So for me, I loved it, back to the flexibility, where you stay focused on your base values and beliefs, and then the fluidity of time of being able to respond with where you are and what the needs are in time, and creating those solutions that are relevant and responsive to need. So it was fun. And not easy, because it was hard for a lot of people to move through the change. But I guess I see the only constant is change. So I both want to be ahead of it and with it, and be smart, not to just move with the flow, but to be smart about how you can use that as the preemptive way to service people. In fact, I was just in Philadelphia this week with the LINK trip, the regional leadership trip. And here again, insights, right? Insights. Over and over and over we would hear. There's no presumptive that we would go into communities and people had all these great ideas for the community. And of course they would never work because the community was never involved in determining the ideation, what do I need? And so then as soon as you would, quote, listen and provide a response that met your needs of who you are and what you can do, as well as the needs of the community, there were two great examples. And they're true of everything. One was they had a pocket park that was getting trashed and tramped every day. And at no one, you'd plant the grass and people wouldn't respect it. And of course it was in the center of an area where there was a high rise of senior citizens. So they brought them in with some kids in the neighborhood who were doing the trashing. And the senior citizens all wanted gardens, but they couldn't stoop anymore. So it was UPenn and Drexel that were working within the university and providing these new higher beds of planters so the seniors could sit on these cute benches that the engineering students devised. And then of course it had a play area with some skateboarding, and they would all be together as opposed to just planting beds, which the seniors couldn't use and the kids would trash. So then everyone had a new sense of ownership. And then there was another one related to graffiti, and it's the same thing where they brought the neighbors in, and instead of just creating graffiti where it would constantly be, you'd clean it up and they'd paint it over it. They wanted to have a sense of place from where they came. And it was, so they designed this great mural that reflected some of their community and heritage. And then you had a respect for it, and everybody, because that's defining who I am. Very different from just slapping some paint on the wall, have an artist get a concept and go. So the whole idea, which is where we were with IBM, of the same precept of how do we listen, what are the needs, and then how do we collectively respond to those needs in ways that make a difference for the long-term outcome of community, but most for people. So that's what I'm excited about. Even today in Atlanta, we're looking now, rather than isolated issues, education, transportation, water, social services, the arts. Everyone is so busy on their own little treadmill, they forget to go across. And yet, collectively, they're all similar ideas. We know how arts infuses energy for innovation, to be smart and be educated. Or we know that there are ways to use technology to enhance the transportation corridors. Just like I always love the UPS story of they turn right instead of left, so you don't get mad because they're turning left and they use it. Oh my gosh, they use less gas. Oh my gosh. So again, it's creating smarter concepts, which of course is one of the IBM themes is smarter cities, smarter planet, thinking across the silos to create that intersection of innovation. But I'm seeing it in community, the collective impact of looking as a community to determine what are those outcomes. Yes, we want children to have positive early learning. Yes, we want children to be learning by first grade and third grade. Yes, we want children to have numeracy skills. Yes, we want high school graduation. Yes, we want readiness for post-secondary. So then who's making a difference? How do we enhance it, invest in it? Or how do we hold people accountable for the results they say they want in a way that creates that collective community positive impact? So more and more people are looking at it that way instead of, it may be because we can't afford everybody going down their own lane. We just have to provide more cross channels to create that confluence, the confluence of coming together where the strength of the power of one and the power of many. One of my new favorite kind of strategies or theories that I talk a lot about, especially with women. In fact, I just spoke at the Georgia Tech Women Alumni event 2 Saturdays ago. And the topic is there's no such thing as work-life balance. The irony is that even a feather, which is that smallest thing, can get you out of balance. So don't even worry about it. The and is that there is such thing as work-life alignment or congruence. Because with seasons, there are seasons where you're going to spend more time on your career, more time with your children, more time with your family, more time with your elder parents, more time, or wherever it is, but the seasons will sort of even out over time. And so that the being all the time, every day, doesn't happen because you'll never be in balance and you'll always be in a place you're not supposed to be. You want to be somewhere else. So giving folks that kind of comfort and confidence, as I love to talk to young women about, is being able to understand that there's seasons and fluidity of life, the path that you can just keep on walking. But the and is to be able to be clear about whatever your life values are. And to say, if you claim your life values are faith and family and friends, or finances mean your work, or that the idea that you need to stay fit, the healthy part, and of course, for me, my other F is philanthropy, how you give and steward your life resources. And if you say those are your values, and then you look at where your work priorities, meaning your life, that current life priorities, what you have to get done on your given day or you think you do. And then you look at your hours, because the one thing we all have are 24 hours. Sometimes you feel better than others, but you still have 24 hours. So then do those measures of how I use my time reflect what I say my values are. So over time, how do you get that more in alignment? So like I always laugh about fit. Didn't get my exercise in. Well, do I really value it? Or if I do value it, what do I do about it? So how do I act? So I love to talk, especially with young men and women, about that whole life alignment of clarity on who you are and what you believe and what are your values, and then clarity on how you steward your resources. So once you look at time, then I always say that there's this third hand over here. It's on the one hand and on the other hand, and then there's this third hand, which is that stewarding, the who we are and how we, quote, live our lives. And that's the thumb sort of is the governance, that's the value thumb of the legal, ethical, moral part of our life. Don't ever think you're entitled or above the law or one little immoral thing, it'll lead to another one. So it's the moral, legal, ethical part of your life, how your life is governed. How you treat, these are my pointers, how we treat people every person. How do we treat people? Diversity, cultural differences, global differences, but understanding the stewarding of how we treat people is reflective of us. Of course, this is my tall finger, is the tree finger, is how do we steward the environment? How are we leaving the place better than we found it? This is the ring finger, my promise finger, is delivering every day on our promise, the best we can, to our family, to our life, to our work. So how do we deliver on our promise? Do we do what we say we're going to do? And then, of course, this is the stewarding, the volunteering, the giving, the making a difference, the volunteering, the giving, the contributing, the service side. And you always say, why is this last? Because that's your grab finger, and it always makes life back to the ethics. And so if you look, on the one hand, this is what I say I value. On the one hand is on how I spend my time to help reflect that congruence, and I can change it. What actions can I take to make it more congruent? And then that third hand is then that symbol of who we are and how we spend our life. But the essence is how you over time get to that congruence and integration. Because how I spend my time today is different than it was 10 years ago. And one example is I was traveling a lot more, so therefore the depth of some of the work that I was doing was much more surface. But I loved it. I still got to do what I do, but I loved the job and I loved the travel. Now I don't travel as much, so I get to do deeper things here that are really, really rewarding. But that wasn't rewarding. It's just different time, it's not so much priorities, but different way of stewarding my 24 hours over here. So I think that's what's really fun, and that's what I love. One of my favorite things is to talk with, or to be able to be engaged with young people, or there are a lot of people, literally on the Philadelphia trip, I talked to 10 people who were younger than I, but all thinking, what's next? And so going in with faith, no fear, of how do you be open to opportunities. It's not like you are leaving, but you're going into, it's always the moving into. With faith and minimum fear. Not that we're not scared, or not that we don't question, but it's moving forward in faith to face that kind of future. But it was funny. So therefore, it's not just the college kids whom I love, and they're so fabulous. And that's a new one of my favorite things, is to move them into leadership and service opportunities on community boards and nonprofit organizations, to bring that creative thinking and new way of being, but still value-based and rooted. The rootedness gives you the freedom to fly. I do think that some of the things that I grew up with, I mean, like for me, meeting my first African-American professional person was for me. But these kids, their world is so fabulously diverse and so rich in different experience. They travel all over the world. I mean, a lot of our kids, and then there are a lot of our children who are deep in poverty, and the thing that saddens my heart the most is the same issues of poverty that we were working on in the 60s have been exacerbated. I mean, here Atlanta is with the largest poverty gap of any city in the country, and the most difficulty coming out of poverty because of where you get stuck. And so that's the part that breaks my heart. So how do we provide that kind of content and construct for folks to have confidence to come out and try something new when they've been beaten down for so long? But on the other hand, children or young adults that I get the privilege of working on with Outstanding Atlanta and Lead Atlanta, and young professionals that are working in nonprofits and that are serving City Year and Hands-On and Points of Light and Teach for America. I mean, all these great young professionals, just your heart soars. They have a lot to learn. There is something about age. You hope you learn in terms of age and wisdom. But on the other hand, I learn from them every day. I love it. I love it. One of the joys about doing the Atlanta superintendent search was that we got to work with this fabulous group of young, new school board members. And they were fabulous. They've taken hard stands already. They've been mature in their roles. So it's really been fun to watch that process and be so respectful and hopeful. I mean, I never not had hope, but I've loved experiencing the exuberance as well as some wisdom. So it's fun. How to create a climate. Today I was talking to a young man whom I love, who was one of my mentees, and he's taken on a challenging assignment from our mayor. And that's what I was telling him. I said, you can do this, you can do this. You're creating a culture and a climate of hope and expectations in a place that's very depressed. I said, but what wonderful to give, communicate, be open, dialogue, create a space where folks build trust. What fabulous place is that? Because there is none now. I mean, and so I said, his exuberance and faith and trust, and yet common sense, reading budgets, looking at the financials, looking at the organization, it's really messed up, getting it back in order, but on the other hand, his ability to see the mission of the work is so exciting, and then how to build that infrastructure so the mission, deliver on your promise, can occur. So that's what's fun, is to see and giving me the kind of, I'm available to you, I can do whatever. And it was fun because he'll do great. He'll do great. And he has a team who will make it happen. And a team outside that will support him. So that's what I love, is seeing those young people take on these difficult tasks. They're going to do great.
Is there anything you wish you had done?
No, it's interesting. People ask that, where do you want to travel? What do you want to do? I live in a faith statement. So I want to be open to callings and flexible to respond in ways that are with the servant, kind of that leader, the servant mentality. And yet my aspiration is one thing, how to create a climate in which every child can grow up to be an interdependent, contributing citizen. And so that's sort of the statement of where and how do I continue to walk. And that's the blessing of energy and health. And so I may be growing old, yes, almost 70, but the and is the blessing and the burden of energy and health and time and intelligence today, as well as experience that that can yield some insights that are really fabulous. So I think that's the thing, is the being open and flexible to the opportunities of what's open to us, is sort of the wish, is to always be that, open to opportunities when they come and not be fearful. There are times when I say, why did I say yes? Oh gosh, why did I say yes? That was the stupidest idea. Why am I speaking today? I don't know what I'm talking about, which is true a lot. But then you say, well, what am I learning from this? And I won't say no again, because I say I lived through it. It was fine. Friday I was moderating a panel. I thought, why did I say I would do this? I don't know anything. But it worked out fine because I have a facilitative nature and I didn't need to know anything. The panelists knew everything. That was fabulous. So again, that was the facilitative part. That was what was important. I didn't need to know everything. Or even yesterday, this is so funny, my husband's so cute. I made this wonderful offer to the new superintendent who was doing the Beltline tour with her new employees. And of course I said, why don't you all come over to our house for refreshments after? And I think, why did I say that? And of course it was perfect because I came, we had Cokes and everybody got water and chicken nuggets and carrots. We had a little bit carrots and vegetables and fruit. It was fine. It wasn't a big deal, but you can make it a big deal. And of course then you're so glad you did it, because all the out-of-town guests got to see a real house with real people, including a teacher. My husband's a teacher, so it's like a real house with real people in a real neighborhood, near the Beltline, near the MARTA station. And Paul Morris, who's had the Beltline, just dropped them off in their van. They all came up the stairs. You're thinking behind, I'm so stupid. Why did I even ask them? It's probably too much on their agenda. And of course, they loved it. I mean, we loved it. It happens all the time that I'll say, I'll do something. Oh, but then you learn from it. And it was fabulous. And Jeff kept saying, it's going to be fine. They won't see the dirt in the corner. Because I got home Saturday, right? Didn't have time to clean. I mean, it was fine. It wasn't horrible. It was fun. It was fabulous. So I think that's the whole point, how to make it fabulous. In spite of from the beginning, insecurities, inadequacies, always feeling, oh, I'm so stupid. That's the catalyst. It is the global. And it's interesting because sometimes I can think I'm stuck. Like Jeff and I have lived in our house for 42 years. I worked for IBM forever. We've been involved with the same organizations like the United Way and Communities in Schools and the Junior League and the arts community, the theaters. And our Megan and Will, our children, they lived in the same house their whole life, in their same bedrooms the whole life. So a part of that seems stuck. And you think, wow, they are really stuck. I call that rooted. And the rootedness then allows that flexibility to kind of fly, flutter, and be around and be willing to take on new responsibilities. And I see that in our children as well, that they're willing to risk new things, but they're very settled in terms of faith security, in terms of the stamp of where their base is. And consequently, that also allows you, for me, not only did I not know anybody out of my initial neighborhood in Jacksonville, but from an IBM perspective, to see the global experience and to be able to understand one of my greatest ahas when we were trying to develop volunteerism across the globe. And the essence was, companies like IBM, UPS were all doing that. And the essence was, well, volunteerism is a U.S. thing. U.S. people, you think, no. Everyone wants to give. Everyone wants to make a difference. Everyone in some place in their heart wants to be a good neighbor. And how do we express being a good neighbor? And it may look different in a village in China or Africa, but it's their same spirit of being that good neighbor, the doing unto others. And so that was those wonderful ahas, and watching how that evidenced itself literally in every part of the globe of the sameness of who we are as people, that humanity, the global humanity. And the consequence, of course, still as we see about poverty and education, just even today about the young women that have been taken out of their homes, and the whole, how we bring in equity and equality, and how education becomes part of that key to bring people out of poverty, especially young women. And I think that has so many global implications, so that what we do, I always have to say, you have to root it where you live. Get off your back deck, onto the front porch, get to know your neighbors in a connectedness, and then proceeding to do the world. And it was funny, there's another of my favorite stories. You're going to love this. It's from the McGuffey's Reader. McGuffey's Reader in the 1800s, called True and False Philanthropy. And you know how McGuffey's Reader is allegorical. Everything is allegorical, and you know by the names who people are, whether they're good or bad. And this was Mr. Phantom, bad guy, and Mr. Goodman. And often when I tell this story, I always say good person, because it could be a woman, good man. But the whole idea in this, the dialogue that these two have, was Mr. Phantom wanted to go about and doing benevolence across the whole world, feeding all the hunger, releasing all the prisoners, whereas Mr. Goodman wanted to start in his neighborhood. And his image was, if I start here, my neighborhood will draw into the village, which will go to the next village, and the dovetail of all the villages will create a world in which we can address those issues of prisoners and famine and whatever. This is 1880, so the issues haven't changed much. But in the end, what was so interesting about the dialogue was that after Phantom says, oh, but the views of being benevolent and changing everybody in the whole world, Goodman says, but if you don't start where you are, so often those images of big forbid you from doing anything because it's so overwhelming. But if you can start where you are, with the small things, they dovetail to create a kind of sense of whole. And I always think that's true, is that how you again, align. I was chair and had the privilege of being chair of the Carter Center. And in that, you see the issues of the world, and yet you still live in a place. So how do you have the place? You reflect those values, but then it gives you the ability to bring credibility and trust in any place else in the world where you can bring your expertise or your tools or your resources. IBM, for instance, does our Smarter Cities Challenge, where we bring IBMers from all over the world to a team and to a country where the people in that country have expressed a need. It could be health, it can be education, It could be starting a chamber of commerce because they want economic development, but whatever. And the IBMers can come in and do a collective study and create a plan. But again, you don't go unless you're invited, and it's identified by the community. With the community, you build the solution because the, quote, experts leave and the community is left, either with a piece of paper or a plan that can be implemented. So it gets back to that listening and being responsive, but it has implications across the world. That's why I really love the work that I got to do at IBM, and I'm still gratefully involved with the Council on Foundations, which is the international organization of philanthropic leaders from community foundations, family foundations, large independent foundations, corporate foundations, looking at issues, so it cross-sects issues, education, poverty, health, environment, with the various foundation sectors to create solutions, which I love. And so therefore you can look at the global view, but then coming back and having the privilege of serving on our Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta, and then you move into the neighborhood and you start a little lettuce works in one of the neighborhoods, or you start Neighborhood Nexus, which provides data for folks to find out information where they live and how they can correct situations like blight or zoning. So it's that both and of having the global view, respect for the issues that are globally, and bringing it on home, and because you still live every day where you are.
So with your affinity for mathematics, do you still take a break and work out differential equations just for fun, just to keep the mind clear?
No, it's so funny because Jeff, of course, teaches physics still. I mean, he does his lab books. And, you know, it's so funny. Mine is the approach. I feel like English majors treat life as a book. History majors treat life as a history lesson. I treat life as a math problem. So I'm always trying to figure it out. Shortest distance between 2 points. How do we create the solution? Sort of the geometric equations. One of my favorite topics that I loved in math was topology, which is the inside and the outside are all the same. And so that's that kind of infinities thing where we're all connected. So that's how I don't do the differential equations or integration or algebra, but I treat life like a math problem. So it's always trying to, quote, figure it out. What's the solution? And yet everybody else doesn't treat it that way. So my solution may not be your solution. And so how to both respect that in a way that is alike. One of my favorite movies we've seen, everybody laughs, is Particle Fever. It's fabulous. It was a story of CERN and breaking the particles to the smallest molecule. But what I loved about it, again, was that symbiotic relationships with all the research theorists who for 40 years have been trying to figure out this smallest particle. And then you had the experiential people who built the building that was going to crash this particle, who are the makers, the make it happen. And yet what happened in the end, if you hadn't had the theorist, they could have never built the building. If they couldn't have built the building, they wouldn't have learned what they learned to feed the theorists to move to their next levels. And even though some of the theorists said, oh, it wasn't what I thought, it fed them to new thinking. And even if the people didn't build it right, they would learn from the theorists about how to improve the facility the next time. So again, it's that topology of that inside-outside infinite flow that sort of creates the symbiotic world, which is where I live. You know, you just kind of find those connection points and how people can learn with and from each other. Like my meeting this morning with my young friend, I literally got back in the office, sent him a note of 10 people I wanted to be his new best friends who were in the arena that wanted him to succeed and had been frustrated with this organization, but would provide insights to him about how to provide some new ways of being. So literally connecting. The flow, keep it fluent, the confluence of it all. So lots of people come to me about career experience, you know, what am I going to do with my life? And so it's always, they laugh, you say, you've thought about this, haven't you, Ann? And I said, oh, yes, I've thought about it a lot. I say, think about your 5 Ps for who you are in your personal and professional life. And first is you want to have passion. You want to care about what you do. It doesn't help anybody to go to work if they don't care. I mean, you have to have some sense of connecting to the value. The second is to know what professional skills you bring and what you want to gain. So a lot of people go as lawyers, but they don't like being a lawyer, but there's those skills in terms of thinking. So how you can grow or gain, you use what you have, but know what you want to grow. And then this one is the funny one, is your personal preferences. If you know you don't want to work inside the perimeter, and that's the only place, then you're going to frustrate yourself. So be clear on some of these personal preferences. If you're an early person, I mean, but it makes it really important to claim it. You can choose to discard it, but know your personal preferences. The third thing is I want people to be proud of what they do. So they'll talk about it, being an advocate, feeling proud of the work, of the organization, of the people, because that advocacy component will fuel you in your work. And then, of course, the other piece is again back to the service, the sort of the philanthropic side of, do you want to invite others to be a part of it? It's just like if you're selling, that you can bring your passion and your pride, but that you can invite others in terms of that kind of positioning. And so if you look at that, granted, all of us aren't going to always love our jobs, because the jobs can either be menial or not exactly using our skills, but that you want to enter, as I say every day, the joy of a person who has what can be considered menial task, but they are so important to the rest of the wheel. And to know that you bring value in that wheel, that everybody brings value in the wheel. And so if you think my job, I think, oh, I might just be, which I think is not the case, the person who's cleaning the floors at the end of the day. If you didn't have that person, there would never be the front of the day, because then no one could ever work. So how do you know where your value is in the whole of the piece? So it gives people a different way to think about it, so they can sort of begin to say, what is my passion? What is my skill sets? What are the things that I care about now that it's sort of like when you're looking for your house. I have to have the basement or whatever. And then where can you be pride in terms of speaking out and being an advocate, and then the philanthropy, inviting people to participate with you. So it's fun. And I do that too when people say, I want to be involved in the community. I say, you don't want to be, if you look at from A to Z, from arts to the zoo, if you don't care about animals, don't be on the zoo board. But there are other boards you can be on. Or if you love animals, then go be, so I think people forget, like, I just want to help. Use something like my little 5 Ps to direct where I want to help. If you're non-performing, I know when I'm non-performing. And I may be non-performing because I'm not passionate, I don't feel like I've got the right skill set, it's interrupting my life, I'm not proud, whatever it is. I know when I'm non-performing, it just doesn't fit. And yet I'm not willing to either change it or quit or move on. But as soon as you do, and the other people are now getting mad at you because you're non-performing, everybody's like, oh, she's non-performing. And how fabulous and freeing it is when you claim your part of the non-performing, and then make those moves that can free everybody up from being mad at you for not doing your job. Claiming our responsibility in the non-performing instead of the other. And that's where you can claim it on those 5 fingers. You can realize, oh, I really don't care. Or, oh, this isn't where I like to work. Or, all these, I don't have the skills to do it. And you can make the changes. So it's fun. Love that part. Now, this is another fun one. When we talk about collective impact now, it really does, in today's environment where we talk about the skill sets for the 21st century, soft skills, which are critical to the success, that often, because the landscape changes so much on hard skills, that now in terms of looking at who we are and what we do, what I look at now are what I call my C's, and I think about how we learn to live in this environment in a collaborative way, building a cooperative sense of the value for everybody, the cultural differences, but also the cultural similarities, the power of communication. And we always talk In today's environment, the power of communication is word spoken, written, body language, social media, how you reflect yourself is so powerful, and the consistency of your communication or not. And then, of course, building community across multiple sectors. Again, it's that how do we get from off the back deck in my isolated silo back here into that collective community of holding hands and recognizing how interdependent we really are. It makes such a difference. So as I look at that kind of connectedness and creating a culture in which today's people can really work well, there are new skills that are valued, especially around the collaboration, the communications, the culture piece, and that connectedness for community. And I think a lot of people have forgotten how important the soft skills are that will yield you success, because in most cases you can learn the hard skill related to the job, or at least observe what others are doing and move into those skills that may be changing how you look another person in the eye.